Am I a hero?
Am I a hero?
We're here to challenge your definition of a hero.
Welcome to 10,000 Heroes, and I'm really excited to jump right in to grilling Encore about this interview because I thought it was so cool. First of all, let me just say, I don't think we've had this conversation before, but we're both massive Bourne Identity fan. The Jason Bourne series. But I can't even really claim that. It's kind of like I think I'm a coffee nerd, but then people come over and they find out I don't even grind my beans, and then they're just like, oh,
Ooh, yeah.
So I've never actually read any of the books. But when I saw the first movie, I saw it like when it came out in theaters, like the weekend it came out. I remember being excited for it to come out, even from the previews. And I was like, this is a new hero. This is a new thing. And I was just in. I just bought in right away. And I want to poke you a little bit about why. I think you guys did a great job of exploring the many facets of it. But I think we could just extrapolate ad nauseum probably about like why this hero, to me, encapsulates so much of our time and our moment in history. And I think as a good starting point is that he says in the interview, you guys start off and he said, I don't like superheroes.
Brian says that.
Brian says, I don't like superheroes. I never resonated with superheroes. And I would say that Jason Bourne represents the opposite. So whereas a superhero is just like, oh, that constraint of reality is just not a thing for you. Whatever it is. Gravity, limitation of what your eyesight can be. It's like that's not going to be a thing. You have a superpower.
Yeah.
But this idea of this hero is that I could develop my own sensory acuity, my own power of attention to such a detail that it'll seem like a superpower.
Yeah.
And that to me is captivating. So I have a hero. I just finally, pretty late to the party, but finally got to read Josh Waitzkin's book this year, The Art of Learning. And now Josh Waitzkin is my total hero. And, that book is so like, just to give a little context, if anybody remembers the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer, Josh Waitzkin was actually the subject of that movie. He was this little kid that was a chess prodigy that just kind of cut his teeth in the shark-infested waters of the Washington Square, New York City chess game, and took it to like the fullest, just the highest level of chess, international chess competition, and then burnt out and quit. And then went into Tai Chi push hands and took that to the world stage, top level of competition. And then moved to jiu-jitsu, got his black belt, and just trained at the highest level of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And then now, like his latest project is just surfing the biggest waves on these e-foils to just go as fast and just maximize just the total. So his whole life has been a life of learning. And there's a really interesting passage in that book where he talks about these martial arts masters and the tendency to attribute like these magical sort of powers to them. But he's like, it's not magic. It's just really highly developed sensory acuity. And they're just perceiving details that to me or you looks like magic or supernatural, but it's actually just natural. It's totally within the range of nature.
And if we see them as superheroes, we place this artificial distance between us and them, between us and our possibility. But when we see them as heroes who are not supernatural, but are just highly focused, like these martial arts masters or Jason Bourne,
right?
Then there's this link. They're like, oh, that could be my future.
That could be me. If I just had the time, if I just had the time and attention to develop some skill to that degree, I could do that. There's a pathway there.
Yeah, and I'm gonna rob you of that excuse because we do have the time. We have the same time they did.
Right.
So it's if I just had the attention and
what else?
The vision, the clarity.
Yeah, the clarity,
discipline.
Yeah, I could develop
imagination. Because that's a funny part of this is that we think of the superheroes as being about imagination, but by making them super, we're actually constraining our own imagination of what we're capable of.
Yeah. And this has totally become the time of the superhero. I'd say like in the last decade. I mean, just Marvel from, Blade on had this total resurgence of like the Marvel universe. And like that, the superheroes have just kind of dominated our cultural mythos, I would say. Would you agree? To an extent? I know you're not so steeped in popular culture, but yeah.
I've heard about that. I've heard about Marvel.
Yeah. You've watched a few. Yeah. Well, I would say, okay, well, what do you think about this too? Because wouldn't you say like Sherlock, for me, the movie that they did with Robert Downey Jr., the Sherlock Holmes, had the same quality, right? And even
someone who's developed their faculties.
Someone who's developed their faculties.
Yeah.
And this was like kind of even the essence of what, the novels, the Sherlock Holmes was like. There's this power to rationalism, to empiricism, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So what I want to push on a little bit, what I think is interesting, I don't know if it's interesting to our listener or not, but what you guys touched on, that's different for me about Jason Bourne, makes it sort of like uniquely, just to throw a word at it, postmodern or whatever, but that he doesn't have a flag. Yeah. He's not like James Bond. He's not fighting for the crown.
Yeah.
So in a sense, and he doesn't have like a lot of interiority. Like Brian's saying, it's like, we don't care about his dialogue. We care what he does. So we care about the development of these faculties. And in that sense, Jason Bourne has just been a tool. He's like this killing machine that was developed by a system or an institution's government. And now he's totally abandoned by it. And he's just this really highly developed tool. And I think there's actually something pretty profoundly unsettling about that, about how we see ourselves right now. It's like this focus of like, we can just develop ourselves to the highest extent, but for what? And there's still like this melancholy and this, he's unmoored throughout the whole series. Through that character never has a home.
No, that's what he's looking for.
That's what he's looking for. That has become the heroic quest in that universe, right? It's not to develop anymore skills. He's like got all the skills and he doesn't have a memory. So he has this like just wandering around in this fugue state of just precision and just like the highest levels of human development, and yet nothing to fight for or defend. No love to come home to and find himself there.
Yeah, it's a kind of warning about excellence without soul.
Yeah, I'm not going to say another word because I think that's the perfect intro to this conversation.
Okay, welcome everybody to the show today. I have Brian Freeman, who, for me, is most famous for writing a couple of Jason Bourne books recently, but I'm sure he's famous for many other things. Yeah, he was just showing a picture of the Bourne treachery. And so I just want to recap for you, Brian, and for some of our listeners, some of the goals I have with this podcast, because they're always clarifying themselves to me as each episode and each week goes on. So I was thinking about it this morning, the three things that came to mind. One is to investigate heroism, 10,000 hero. And the idea there is to kind of dismantle the notion of heroism and look at its constituent parts and then put it back together again. So to understand kind of what the different elements are, what it means to all of us, and bring it a little bit closer to home, which gets to the second goal, which is about role modeling different kinds of heroism. And so my idea with the episode is that each guest role models a different aspect of what it is to be a hero. I have this belief that we all have the potential to be heroic, to be leaders in our own lives, and that if we investigate and apply ourselves, live our lives authentically, we can discover we have a purpose, that our existence, in fact, is a gift to ourselves and our community, and that if we pursue that purpose, we can realize our potential for contribution. So that's something I like to investigate with people. And the third, if possible, is to offer a nugget of wisdom or insight in every episode, coming from the guests that could then really change the lives of our listeners if they took it seriously. And I don't know, Brian, if you heard any of the other episodes, but there's always that attempt to like, what's something that we could all take out of your life and your experience that would improve all of our lives. So that's just a little bit of a preface. But now let's talk a little bit about Jason Bourne. And so one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here is that I'm a huge fan of the Jason Bourne kind of character and experience. And I'd like to ask, I see you as one of his most trusted biographers at this point. And so I just wanted to get a sense from you. I wanted to ask you some questions about our mutual friend, Jason. But Sure. Before that, I'd love to hear a little bit of how you guys came to meet, or how it came to be that you're writing books about Jason Bourne.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been in the publishing biz and making my living this way for about 17 years now, which we can talk about later. But that's an amazing. It's just been an amazing experience for me, and a dream that goes back to when I was just a little kid. In addition to growing up as a writer, I grew up as a very passionate reader, and I loved all the big dramatic authors from the 1970s and 1980s. And I can remember reading The Bourne Identity, Robert Ludlum's first Jason Bourne book, all the way back in 1980 when it came out, and I was all of 17 years old. And if you had told me back then that 40 years later a book would be coming out with my name and Robert Ludlum's name together on the cover, I would have said, "Oh, that's just crazy." But here we are. The way it all came about was about it's coming up on almost 3 years ago at this point. I got a call from my agent in New York, and she said that that the Putnam Publishing House and the Robert Ludlum estate were looking for a new author to take over the Jason Bourne series and kind of breathe some new life into it. And was I interested in having my hat tossed into the ring? And of course, having been a Ludlum fan my whole life and a Jason Bourne fan my whole life, I said, yeah, let's give that a try. And and that was followed by, I think it was like 4 months of sort of dead silence, and didn't hear anything back, didn't talk to anybody. And, I knew this was the kind of opportunity that, there were dozens of thriller writers going after. So I thought, well, they've decided to go another way, and that's okay. But then I got another call from my agent, and she said 5 words that will live in my memory for a long time, which was Putnam wants you for Bourne. And so I gave my wonderful editor at Putnam, Tom Colgan, a call, and he was asking, what would I want to do with this Jason Bourne character? And I said, there have been so many iterations of Bourne over the last 40 years, and his history goes back so far that I think the way that we have to make this work is by sort of rebooting the Bourne character and kind of starting the series over in a lot of ways, and bringing back the authenticity of Ludlum's original character and the characteristics that made Bourne such an iconic, enduring hero for all these years. And so, and to take that character and then to sort of drop him down into an all new modern setting. And so that was what we did then in the Bourne Evolution, which was my first Bourne that came out last year. And I was trying to write it in such a way that if you were a huge Jason Bourne fan, whether it was from the books, whether it was from the Matt Damon movies, you'd recognize this character and be familiar with and feel like this is the hero that you've loved all these years. And yet at the same time, if you somehow had been living under a rock for 40 years and had no idea who Jason Bourne was, you could still pick up this book and get to know this character in a whole new, full, intimate way, and really fall in love with this character right from the beginning with the Bourne evolution. And now the Bourne Treachery, the new book just came out last month, and so I've now got 2 Jason Bourne novels under my belt, and I've signed on to do 2 more. So and it's really one of the most enjoyable, satisfying projects that I've worked on as a writer, and I've got 24 thrillers out in print at this point. But it really is it's just an amazing honor to have this kind of a legacy entrusted to your care, because there are so many people that are so passionate about Bourne as a hero, and so feeling like I've got the opportunity to sort of nurture that series and move it forward. It's a great opportunity. Is it scary? Absolutely. I mean, I think when they first told me that they wanted me to do the Bourne books, my first reaction was, oh my God, they want me to do the Bourne books, and my second reaction was, oh my God, they want me to do the Bourne books. So it's a little intimidating, stepping into the shoes of a hero like that and a thriller writer like Ludlum. And then literally what I had to do was sort of write at the top of my whiteboard, have fun, because, it is such an amazing opportunity. And if you don't stop and really savor it, you're missing out on what makes it so exciting. So
you could accidentally turn it into work.
Yeah, exactly. And is it work? Of course. I mean, this is my job, but it is also, something I've dreamed about doing my whole life, and it's immensely satisfying. So
okay, I need to go back to that, because that's just music to my ears. When did you start dreaming about doing this?
Oh gosh. I can remember all the way back in 6th grade. So what, I was 10 years old, sitting down and starting in on my first mystery novel. And then I think it was 8th grade, I had this wonderful composition teacher in California, and she really recognized my love of writing, and she did something I think these days, with all the standardized tests and curricula a teacher would probably never feel comfortable doing. She said, when you come to my class, don't worry so much about the lesson plans. Just sit there and write your stories. And that was what I did through most of her class. And
she said that to you because of your skill with writing, or to everyone?
Yeah, because she knew, she saw my writing, and she knew, she wasn't really going to be, teaching me anything about composition, because I'd been writing, already for years. And, what she really wanted to do was nurture that passion for writing and that excitement. And that was really what made me a writer. I mean, after her class, I sat down and started in on my first full-length novel. I spent about 18 months finishing that. And from that moment forward, that was what I wanted to do with my life, was write books.
Wow.
And, I still have that very first novel sitting in my nightstand drawer, written in Bic pen on binder paper. And it was kind of fun, because I actually dated every section when I was working on the book. So I can go back and see, in 1977, I guess it was, when I was working on this, and tracking it all the way through from beginning to end. So yeah, this has been what I've wanted to do for a long time. The fact that I get to do it is just amazing.
Yeah. And just to share, what's that teacher's name?
Her name was Joyce Bartke. And what was really special was when my very first novel came out in 2005, it was called Immoral. That was the first in my Jonathan Stride series. And I was living in Minnesota at this point, but I scheduled the very first event for Immoral back out in California, near where my parents live. And I actually mentioned Miss Bartke in the acknowledgments of Immoral, crediting her for kind of setting me on the path to becoming a writer. And I was actually able to track her down on the internet and invite her to attend my very first book signing. So I was able to thank her in person for what she did for me. So that was just really an amazing moment.
Beautiful. One more question about you before we get to Bourne. If someone else just came to you right now and said, hey, I want you to write a series of Hercule Poirot novels, or I want you to continue some books in the style of Graham Greene, can you just do that? Is that the skill set you've developed?
Yeah, I honestly would I love those kind of opportunities. I mean, I've written two dozen books under my own name, but it's a real tribute to feel like you can take the work of an author in a series that is so important to so many people and give it sort of a new lease on life. And I love the idea of doing that. There are certainly other authors that I'd love to be able to do that kind of legacy work for. I mean, it was a great thrill to do that with Ludlum because I was such a personal fan of his. And I think that's becoming more and more a thing in the publishing industry is creating some of these legacy projects, and obviously from the publisher's perspective, there's economic ramifications to it, but I think for readers, it's that sense of that you don't have to say goodbye to characters you loved and an author you loved, because I remember back when Robert B. Parker passed away, and this was before they had then started doing some legacy work with Parker's characters. I had a reader who wrote to me like right after Parker had passed away and saying, he was so upset at the idea that he'd lost one of his favorite authors. And he was telling me, well, I'm so glad that I found you because I feel like that cushions the blow a little bit because I enjoy your work so much. And then he started asking, are you exercising regularly? Are you eating right? But when they then started doing more Parker books, I thought I was hoping that reader, was enjoying that chance to read those characters again. And for an author, clearly that's a big challenge. Sort of stepping into the shoes of the character somebody else has created. And I was a little worried about that when I started in with Bourne. But then I actually, began to think about it, and I realized my history with Jason Bourne actually went back a lot longer than any of my own characters, since I'd been reading, Jason Bourne and seeing him on the movie screen for, upwards of 40 years. So it felt at that point pretty natural for me to sort of, step into the shoes of Bourne and bring him back to life in a whole new setting.
Yeah. So for that preparatory process, what did you do? Did you go back and read all the Ludlum books and watch all the movies?
I did. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I reread all the books, which I can't tell you how many times I've read The Bourne Identity in my life. It's one of my favorite books. So yeah, I reread the books. I watched all the movies again. I even went back. A lot of people don't remember. You have to be a real Bourne aficionado to remember that Matt Damon was not the first Jason Bourne. Actually, Richard Chamberlain was the first Jason Bourne. Yep.
So there was a Bourne movie before the Matt Damon movies?
There was, yeah. Back, I think it was 1988. There was a miniseries with Jacqueline Smith and Richard Chamberlain of the Bourne Identity. And that was my wife was not a fan, but I always loved that miniseries. I had it on VHS, and in fact, if I was ever sick and was staying home from work, that was my feel good movie. I'd put on the VHS of the Bourne Identity miniseries and watch that. So yeah, Bourne and I go back a long way.
Wow. Okay, so then you're just a great person to serve as the biographer and the foil in this interview. So before I ask you about Bourne, then let's just get it clear. What's our definition of a hero going forward? Because I'm going to ask you in what ways Bourne's a hero, and in what way Bourne's not a hero. So what should we use? Let's give me like a first stab or a first draft at our definition of a hero here.
Yeah, that's a good question, because there are so many different types of heroes, and one thing I always say in my books is that I do not like writing about superheroes. I don't find superheroes, whether it's actual sort of Marvel-esque superheroes or heroes in whether action books or detective books that sort of always get everything right and sort of know everything that's going on and are the tough guys that never get hurt. That's, to me, that's not really an authentic hero, or it's not the kind of hero that I like to write about. I like heroes who are human and flawed, and to me that's the essence of the real hero, is overcoming adversity. I mean, a hero starts from one place, usually in a in sort of a valley that they've created, and they have to sort of dig themselves out and overcome the obstacles in their life. I mean, to me is what heroism is truly about. And I think that's why, Bourne was such a good fit for my work.
Beautiful. All right, let's use that. A hero is someone who overcomes adversity, who starts in a kind of in a depression or a valley that they had some role in creating, and is able to get out of that and experience a different way of living.
Right.
All right. So in what ways then is the Bourne, and if there's differences, if you think there's like fundamental differences between the Bourne in the original novels, the Bourne in the movies that most people know, and the Bourne in your series, then you can identify those differences. But if not, then we don't have to go into it. In what ways is Bourne a hero? Like why are so many of us so drawn to that character?
Right. Yeah. That's a great question, and I'll also talk about the books versus the movies, because I think there are some profound differences there. I think what makes Bourne so appealing is that he is fractured. He is. I mean, the essence of Jason Bourne is that he is struggling with who he is, and that starts with the basics of the fact that he's lost his memory. So he's the man with no past. He doesn't know where he came from. But I think the struggle goes much deeper than that, because I think it's really a much more sort of existentialist struggle for Bourne. It's not just that he's struggling with the fact that he doesn't remember his past. He's struggling with, who is he as a man, and what kind of moral character is he? Is he, a decent man? Is he a killer? I mean, why does he have these skills that he does, and why does he, how does he use them in a way that is good and not evil? I mean, I think those are the fundamental questions and the fundamental struggle that Bourne goes through, and I think that's why so many people relate to Bourne, because I think everyone struggles with exactly those questions. Who are we as people, and what makes us good, what makes us bad, what are the mistakes that we have to overcome, and that's what Jason Bourne is doing, I think, throughout the books and the movies. I think the difference is, I think the key difference between the books and the movie.
Before that, I need to investigate a little bit. So there's two things there. One, I love that the Jason Bourne is holding up this mirror, like much of literature does. They're like, okay, this is how this character is. What can you identify within that? Which of these evils do you see in yourself? Which of these goods do you see in yourself? Like, how do you make these decisions? Like this character, that's great. The other thing, you use the word man. Did you mean that just like as a human, or specifically regarding like modern men and masculinity?
Well, I think it kind of cuts both ways in that regard. I mean, obviously, it doesn't matter whether you're male or female. I think you're struggling with those basic issues of identity. I think certainly for a character like Bourne, there's that extra layer of masculinity and violence that emerges in his character, and he struggles with, when is violence a solution, and when is it not? And I think what you find in Bourne in all these iterations is that there is this sort of essential reluctance that he has to use the skills that he has, and to use them in lethal ways, and yet circumstances wind up kind of putting him in situations where he has no choice. But so yeah, I think it really cuts both ways.
Yeah, like I'm remembering an early scene in the movie where he's in a park in, maybe it's Switzerland, and it's where he first discovers that he has some sort of,
with the police officers. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And he really has no intention to. I mean, really, he doesn't want to interact with them. He certainly doesn't want to harm them. But then he finds himself being able to move his body and move their bodies in certain really violent ways. And he doesn't. He definitely does not want to hurt them or kill them. But he realizes, he's like, oh,
I need to get away. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, I just knocked these people unconscious. I need to get away.
Yeah.
And there's quite a bit of, he has quite a few interactions with people that he's very consciously trying not to hurt people.
Yes.
Until he gets involved with like one of the other agents, I think. And at which point there's just no other option.
Correct. Yeah. That's right. I mean, you see more of an element of self-defense in Bourne, that he's sort of in situations where he has no choice, and that's a tough that's a tough line for filmmakers and a tough line for authors, is keeping that moral dimension for your heroes, because on one hand they end up doing things that are sort of offensive to moral sensibilities, and yet on the other hand, that's part of what's necessary in the circumstances they're in. But it is always kind of that fine dividing line that you have to be straddling very carefully when you're writing a book like this. So.
Yeah, I mean, he's killing in the end. He's killing. He ends up killing a lot of people.
Yeah.
He ends up breaking a lot of rules, a lot of laws.
Right.
He's like acting in a very planned and concerted way against the interests of the U.S. government and probably many other governments. And yet these are all kind of typical anti-hero things. And yet millions of us, including myself, we watch that and we're just like 100% on his side.
Well, I think part of that gets back to what is Bourne fighting against, and I think that a lot of people Bourne's experiences resonate with him, because I think what it ultimately gets down to, both as it started in the Ludlum books and as you see it in the movies as well, it gets back to trust and betrayal. And Bourne has been betrayed by the people that were supposed to be on his side, and they manipulated him and they lied to him, and they've sort of undercut his ability to trust anyone, which is something that I really tried to then bring in as a theme in my Bourne books, because I think that's what ordinary people end up feeling in a lot of these circumstances, is they feel like the institutions that are supposed to be protecting them and working for them aren't, that they're not working on their behalf, that they're following their own interests, that they're lying to them, that they're not giving them the full story. And I think that is it's a very corrosive feeling, because it undercuts that element of trust that is what holds people together in society. And so I think that's one of the things that people respond to about Bourne, is that he's been betrayed the way they feel betrayed, and he's kind of fighting back against this system that undermine who he is.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point from, I guess, the marketing demographics or the marketing perspective, where politically, you can get into stuff in literature that's politically divisive.
Sure.
But this distrust of the system, it just really crops up on all sides of the political spectrum, right? People just distrust different aspects.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and that was what was interesting as I thought about bringing Bourne back, because obviously, you go back to 1980 when the Bourne Identity came out, Ludlum's original book, and Bourne's entire history and ethos in the Bourne Identity emerges out of Vietnam and Watergate and all of the broken promises and distrust and conspiracies that people saw happening in that era. And as I was looking at the Bourne evolution for 2020, I clearly couldn't be using that same backstory for Bourne that we'd used back then. It wouldn't make any sense. But I was struck by the sort of social and political parallels between where we were in the country, in the 1970s and where we were as I was writing the book. That level of distrust and antagonism and conspiracies and feeling like government was breaking promises. All that was just as intense today as it was back in Ludlum's era. So it felt pretty natural, like a sort of natural fit to take Jason Bourne from that era and now bring him down into a parallel kind of era today.
But then you also added this other enemy that we can, everyone can really get together and hate, which is big tech.
Yeah. Yes. And they make such a natural, adversary. And it was I think it was literally the day that the Bourne Evolution came out last year. They had the technology CEOs in DC testifying before Congress. And I was thinking, thank you for the little marketing.
Yeah. And so for maybe the next one, is there going to be some kind of COVID vaccine pharmaceutical role for Bourne?
People ask about that, are you going to put, COVID in the book? And I'm like, oh boy, I cannot see that many people are anxious to revisit, that experience in their fictional lives. Yeah, we've had enough of
more
that.
COVID. Yeah. I totally agree. Okay, so I want to test out. I have this understanding or this theory of Bourne, and I want to see if it relates to, if you can relate to it at all. So I think the reason I'm into Bourne, I come from, a math and philosophy background. That's what I studied in college, and then I got very into meditation and different kinds of spiritual paths towards understanding the oneness of all humanity and all being and consciousness and all this great stuff. And then my friend at some point showed me, and I don't watch very many movies at all. I'm not really hip to pop culture. So the fact that I'm so into Jason Bourne is incredibly anomalous, and all these people I know, they're just totally shocked. But my friend showed me this movie, The Bourne Identity. No, I think he showed me the third one first, because that's just
the Bourne Ultimatum.
Yeah, that's just what he had on his computer. And I just got so obsessed with it because for me, Bourne was demonstrating almost perfect awareness in every moment.
Yeah, he's pretty zen hero in that movie. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not just me that thinks that.
No. It's interesting when you look at the Bourne Ultimatum, how astonishingly little dialogue Bourne has throughout that movie. He says almost nothing. I mean, long stretches go by where he is utterly silent. So it really is an impressive performance for an actor and a pretty bold risk for movie makers to give the hero that much quiet time, where the only way he's interacting is through his connection visually with the audience and the things that he is doing. And you take so much away from what kind of a person he is based on just how he behaves in these circumstances.
Yeah, and ultimately, I mean, going back to Gandhi, who's one of my heroes, or this kind of spiritual or moral trajectory, that's ultimately how we know who we are. We get in difficult situations and we see how we act. And I feel like Bourne, he's in these really high pressure situations. He's able to maintain incredible awareness and always act for the interests of him, the people that he's trying to care for. And it's really, I think I keep coming back to that as being the core for me of what Bourne represents in terms of heroism, is his ability to be present and aware in all kinds of situations.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I mean, I think from a physical standpoint, he's always in the moment and having all these different inputs into his consciousness kind of balanced and operating simultaneously. So I think that's a real good description. I think one of the things that's different though about the movies versus the books, and it's an element that the movies kind of graze on in the Bourne Identity, but then they sort of lose sight of that, is the movies I think portray Bourne as more of this iconic loner. And I don't really think that's a fair depiction of who Bourne is. I think when you read the Ludlum books, you see that Bourne actually really doesn't want to be alone. He needs a relationship in his life. And in fact, in the Ludlum books, his relationship with Marie St. Jacques is kind of what drives the entire series, which is one of the reasons why in the Bourne Evolution, I wanted Bourne's relationship with Abby Laurent, this Canadian journalist, to be front and center in the entire book, because that's so important to who Bourne is. Circumstances are sort of forcing him to be alone, and yet that's not the environment that he wants. He really, I think, wants to be in more of this sort of committed relationship where he's not just the loner. And I thought that they tried to go a little bit into that in the movies, not the way they did in the book, but then they kind of went completely away from that going forward and really turned Bourne into more of this sort of cynical outsider. And while that's fair for where he is in the world, I think it also sort of missed a key dimension of who that character is.
Yeah, because in the movie, his attempted relationship is thwarted. The CIA or whatever comes in killer, and then he turns into this revenge machine.
Yeah, exactly. But that kind of carries it through the next couple of movies.
Yeah, but in your books, I mean, that this maybe is a little bit of an exaggeration, but I see you trying to present him as an attempted serial monogamist.
Yeah, so I think that's fair. Yeah,
he's trying to be in these relationships, but every time something goes wrong.
Right, and I think his desire to be in a relationship is balanced by his desire to protect anyone who gets close to him. And the thing is that anyone who gets close to him is sort of automatically in danger. And so for Bourne, it's this constant tension that he wants to reach out. He wants, to have this woman be a part of his life. And yet at the same time, he knows that by doing so, he's putting her in danger. And so he sort of forces himself to keep this person out of his life because he doesn't want to make her run his risks.
So using literature as a mirror, Bourne is a mirror now. What, as we talked about a few minutes ago, what is that reflecting, or what can we learn from that in our own lives as we try and deal with our own potential, our own amnesia, our own vulnerability, and the relationships? Like what's the metaphor there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at a Jason Bourne book, or you look at a Bourne movie, I mean, clearly this is drama ramped up to a much more, sort of profound level that people are not going to encounter in their day-to-day life. I mean, most people aren't going to be, dealing with, killers and conspiracies and things like that. And yet, at the same time, I think all of us are dealing with, our own struggles and our own obstacles, and being heroic is about how we deal with that in a way that makes us proud of our actions. And also, I mean, and this is certainly true of Bourne as well, how we deal with our mistakes, because I mean, nobody is a superhero, nobody's perfect, and they're going to make profound mistakes in their lives, in terms of what they do and their relationships and other kinds of things, and how you then deal with that and learn from it and move forward. That's part of the nature of being heroic. I mean, it's the idea that you don't let your mistakes define you, but instead they sort of are part of the learning process of trying to make you a better person going forward. I mean, it was interesting, in my latest standalone thriller. It's a book called Infinite, and the hero is a young man named Dylan Moran, who has lost his wife in a terrible accident, and he's made a lot of mistakes in his life. And so the whole nature of the book is a quest for Dylan to try to figure out, are there second chances for people like him, and can he find a way to rise above his mistakes and be a better person. And of course, there's all of the thriller elements, that weave around that. But at essence, it's a very simple, and heroic quest that goes back through, hundreds of years of literature. Is can the hero reach his goal and get where he's going? And that's, on some level or another, I think that quest is what we're all going through.
Yeah. And so does it offer us some hope for redemption?
Yes, that ultimately is, that's what I always try to do in my books. Is I want there to be sort of a redemptive feel, not only for the heroes, but for in some ways, the antagonists as well. I mean, particularly in my own books, what you'll find is that I don't like to have super villains as much as I don't like superheroes. I want, even the people that do the worst things in the books to have this element, this nugget of humanity in them. And I always want there to be some sort of redemptive quality to them. And that's not always the case. I mean, sometimes there are people that are sort of, just too far gone, but to whatever extent I can, I want the villains, as it were, of the books to be as every bit important emotionally to the reader as the heroes are.
Yeah. So there's this real message of hope and possibility. So now I want to go back to you a little bit. Sure. I know that as a young person, you were really captivated by writing, and you had this early support from your middle school teacher into becoming a writer. What about this relationship with hope and flaws, fundamental flaws, overcoming adversity, looking for redemption? Where did that enter your story? Why is that so close to your heart?
Yeah. I go back to when I was applying for college, and I remember it was really interesting because in the essay or in the application for applying to college, the last question they asked was, if you could pick one word to describe yourself, what would that word be? And I always remember the what I chose, because as it happens, my mom ended up choosing exactly the same word to describe me that I had chosen to describe myself, and that was determined. And as a writer, I think determination is absolutely fundamental to what you do, because there are so many things that, you know, sort of conspire to tell you you can't do what you want to do when you're trying to become a writer. I mean, publishing has always been an enormously difficult business in which to break through. It's a very, very, you know, narrow window for success. Gosh, I wrote, you know, a total of 5 books in my life that are still sitting in my nightstand drawer that I wrote before I even started in on my breakthrough book, Immoral.
So and those are 5 books that you wrote with the intent of having them be published, but they were never picked up.
Correct. Yeah. Now,
so again, five kind of, you know, failures or like assaults from the publishing industry. Like, no, you'll never be a writer, Brian. Boom.
Yeah. And I would send out, you know, queries to agents and publishers, and they would come back and just, you know, pristine condition. I mean, paperclip not even moved. And you knew that no one had spent 10 seconds looking at what you sent in. And gosh, there were so many days where I was asking myself, you know, why am I banging my head against the door of this crazy, crazy business? And yet I think, again, it's that determination that writers have to have, that it's sort of a crazy belief in yourself that you can't let go of. You know, I can remember would have been the late 90s. I'd taken a really busy job in Minneapolis. I really hadn't done any writing in a couple of years. And I remember I was sitting in the living room with my wife, and I don't even remember what we were talking about. But out of nowhere, I just burst into tears. And it took me a long time to understand why I was so upset with myself. And I finally realized that I wasn't writing. I wasn't pursuing my dream. I wasn't being true to myself. And I knew that despite all of the setbacks and failures, despite those 5 books sitting in my drawer going nowhere, I needed to try again. And so literally it was the very next night that I sat down and started in on my next novel, which would be the 6th novel I wrote in my life. And that was the book that became Immoral. And that was the one that finally broke through and was sold in 17 languages. And I look back on those days and I'm so grateful that I didn't give up on myself, and I didn't, you know, kind of turn my back on what I wanted in life, because I would have just missed an amazing ride.
And you would have had a lot of those moments of tears, whether you expressed it or not. That's your
and a couple interesting things about that. One, I had the novel of the draft of Immoral finished, and I'd been editing and I kind of had it where I wanted it to be, and yet I hadn't really pushed it out there. You know, I had finally gotten to a point in my life where I had a conversation with Marcia and said, you know, if I never get published as a writer, that's okay. There are other things that I'm proud of in life, and there are other things I want to do with my life, and there are other things that are important to me. If it never happens, you know what? I can live with myself. And it was within weeks after that moment that everything started just going crazy with Immoral, and we sold the book in the US and the UK, and it began, you know, going crazy around the world. It was almost as if I needed to be able to say, I don't need this. And at that point, the world was able to say, okay, now you can have it. Because I was able to say, I can live without this. And then that was the point in my life where it actually was able to come true.
And what were you able to live without? Was it the approval from the publishing industry, or
the idea that if I didn't publish a book in my life, that my life was a failure? Yeah, I think that was really the essence of it. Because I think I had always felt that way back from when I was a kid. The only thing that was going to make my life matter was if I, you know, published a book.
So what did you replace that with?
Well, I'm sorry, what was that?
Yeah, what did you replace it with? Like what would make your life matter then in that moment when you made that decision?
Yeah, that I was more focused on just being happy in doing good work in my career and being happy in my life and looking for other things that would give me joy and satisfaction, that that wasn't the only thing that would prove who I was in this world. And yet it was funny because a lot of people have recurring dreams in their life, and I throughout my life, I had after I had gotten out of college, throughout my career, I would have dreams where I was back in college and I hadn't graduated yet, and I'd been missing classes, and there were really, really frustrating dreams. And it's funny because after I sold Immoral, never had that dream again. So it's kind of like, okay, I had done what I was supposed to be doing, and from that point forward, suddenly it's like, okay, yep, you're where you want to be. So
yeah. And so how was it for you? You said that conversation in the 90s with your wife, you in your living room. So just from that, I know that you weren't like fully on the starving artist train because you had a living room.
Sure.
But so did you have some alternate career, or how did you decide when you got out of college how much time you were going to spend on this thing that you clearly knew was your passion and your purpose, and how much time were you just going to pay the bills?
Well, it's I went to college fully intent on the idea that I was going to major in English and go on and get an MA and a PhD in English, and my career was going to be, I was going to teach English at a college, and I was going to write books. And and then I got to know the English teachers in college. And I said, if that's the way I'm going to end up in 20 or 30 years, I don't want anything to do with it. So I got out of college, and I had completely changed my career goals about teaching English. I still wanted to write books, but suddenly I had sort of no backup. And I kind of floated around for a lot of years. I did computer work and database work, and then I ended up going to work at a nonprofit institution, and I started out maintaining databases for them, and somehow they found out that I was a writer, and they segued me over to write their fundraising campaign case statement, and I started doing more of their fundraising letters and newsletters and things, and so I started going back into more of the writing side and the marketing side, and I ended up being hired as the director of marketing and public relations for a big law firm, and I would end up taking a lot of the work that the lawyers did and sort of translating it into English, and so I felt like I was doing a lot of writing in my career at that point, which I really liked, but when I was on the bus or in an airplane or in a hotel room, I was still, tapping away and writing my books. And so I never, I never gave up on it. But it, like as I say, it took a long time to sort of have all the stars align.
And then now you just write full time. You don't have any other gigs. And how long has it been like that for you? 17 years now. Yeah. So that's been amazingly cool. And honestly, because it's such a tough business, that's one of the things that Marcia and I are most proud of. I mean, the publishing industry has been kind of just turned on its head over the course of the last, 20 years. I mean, everything has been, constantly changing with ebooks and Amazon and audiobooks. I mean, there's just been a whole new approach to how books are marketed and consumed by readers. And boy, there have been some really tough times in the publishing industry along the way. There were certainly days where I was thinking, gosh, is it really worth it trying to make a living when this business is so hard? But we kept rolling with the punches and adapting our approach and taking on new things. And all these years later, here we still are making a living in this business. So I'm real proud of that. Yeah, and it seems how could you? I mean, from the story you've told so far, it just seems hard for me to imagine how you could do something else, especially at this point. Like your writing is just irrepressible. You go to do database stuff, you end up writing. You work for a law firm, you end up writing. Like, how are you going to not write at this point?
Right. Yeah. No, that's exactly it. It would be almost impossible. I mean, I'm now getting to an age where, we start having conversations about, retirement and what does retirement look like. And, and I laugh because, to me, retirement doesn't look all that much different from, where I am today. It's like, maybe I'd like to be able to not have to write 3 books a year. Suddenly going back to when I was writing 1 book a year, that sounds kind of like, a vacation at this point. So maybe I would dial things back a little bit in terms of deadlines and intensity, but I can't really see myself ever being at a point where I would not be writing books. That's what I've wanted to do my whole life. So having the opportunity to do that, that's just extraordinary.
Yeah. And so you would just continue writing, of course.
Sure.
As a writer, this thing I mentioned in the beginning of wanting to offer kind of a nugget of insight that could potentially change our listeners' lives. Is there something you've learned from all of your persistence and determination in writing that you think would be worth sharing in that respect?
Yeah, it's one of those funny things that when you distill it down, I certainly talk to a lot of aspiring writers who are looking for kind of the lesson of how do you make it in this business. And honestly, I always tell them that the thing that you have to remember more than anything else is that 100% of unwritten books have never been published. And that sounds so simple, but it is absolutely the hardest lesson for writers to learn. We are, as writers, our own worst enemies, more than anybody else, more than agents and editors and publishers and anybody else. The person that we have to fight against every single day is ourselves, because it's that voice in your head, that nugget of self-doubt that is constantly back there saying, you can't do this. You're not going to be able to make this work. This project simply doesn't come together. Why are you even doing this? Those voices are always there. That's what makes us human, is that essence of self-doubt. And you have to be able to sort of stare that down and keep going, even when you're constantly feeling like, you're a fraud. I tell writers, hey, it doesn't matter whether you're working on your first book or whether you're working on your 25th book. I'll tell you, those voices don't go away. It is as hard for me today working on a novel and telling myself, yeah, you can do this. You know what you're doing. That isn't any different today than it was, 17 years ago. It is still just the essence of what it means to be a writer, that you are doing battle with yourself and with your psyche. And it is so easy to psych yourself out and believe all the dark stuff that's in your head. And so the real challenge is to keep that belief in yourself and belief in your dreams, and not let external forces get between you and what you have to do.
Wow. So that the fact that you still have that self-doubt working on your 25th novel is, I can't tell if that's either comforting or really sobering. But
I think it's a little of both. I think it tells you that there's nothing odd or unnatural about being an aspiring writer and having doubts. That is just the way writers tend to be wired. And if there's a writer out there that is so cocky as to believe that they've really got all the answers, well, they're probably not very good writers. I think it's that self-doubt, it's that struggle. That's what makes what's going on to the page good, because it means you're digging into yourself and letting all that emotion and overcoming those obstacles. That's what really makes it exciting when those words come onto the page. So I try not to resist that. I just try not to let it dominate me or take me over. I know that battle's always going to be there. I know that monster isn't going to go away. He's going to be sitting at my side every day.
That's beautiful. Don't listen to it, so. I love that. You're not trying to suppress those feelings.
Right.
You're witnessing them.
Yeah. Honestly, if you try to suppress them, it's going to make it worse, because if you don't acknowledge the reality of that struggle, then you're going to run away from it. Well, that's not going to get you anywhere. You have to be able to face it in the eye and say, you know what? Okay, I'm I'm having a bad day. That's okay. There are going to be bad days. You know what? Tomorrow's going to be better. And it is. So.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is so applicable, not only to writers, but people in all creative domains. And whether that's artists or entrepreneurs, or that level of self-doubt is anytime we're creating something that's never been created, that's just going to be part of it because it's never been created before.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, there may be times when you have a vision and that vision comes onto the page and readers really embrace it and they love it and they share that vision and it becomes a huge hit. There are going to be other times where your vision comes onto the page and people don't get it. And they don't necessarily embrace it or understand it. That's okay. I mean, that there are always going to be circumstances like that, but you can't let that sway you from, your vision of what you're trying to do. I mean, if you try to go into writing a book thinking, well, I'm going to write something that's going to be popular, that's not going to work. Because trying to understand what really resonates with people, there's no magic formula for that.
So you're advocating for just total authenticity, just writing what would make sense to each of us.
Yeah, you've got to be true to your story and true to your characters. Exactly.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And thank you, Brian Freeman and Jason Bourne, my two guests on today's show. Show notes, as always, at 10kh.show. And please hit us up on Twitter at 10,000 Heroes Pod. As always, we'd love to hear from you. And I'm going to pressure Nate to get the author of The Art of Learning on a future interview because of all the passion Nate displayed. What do you think about that?
Oh, the gauntlet has been thrown. Okay.
Can you imagine? Yeah. Can you imagine that?
Definitely punching me up. Let me take a second. Yes, I can.
All right. Now, can you make it happen?
Okay, here I go.
Awesome.